There was no evidence. With our warrantless monitoring, the reason that our laws exist, the Fourth Amendment reasonable search and seizure, is you have to have probable cause, and it provides a threshold of evidence. That's not just ethical. We always think, well, it's a civil liberty, and we kind of think of it as a thing in this. It also provides a very pragmatic purpose, because we do not want 1.7 billion pieces of your credit, your banking, your travel. They're saying it's 20 records now for every man, woman, and child. There's 1 million people on this no-fly list, and it's not relevant. The Abdul Muttalibs, the Shahzads, can't even be found in this.
Yeah, but here's what they say, Coleen. What they say is it's okay, because if we collect all this information and we create this illusion of security, at least we'll keep the war over there. We'll keep the killing over there. The mistakes will be made over there, and we will be safe. We will be safe. That is that, and they go to the, again, no attacks since 9/11. We will be safe, and so they see this as kind of, you know, an expensive investment in this idea that they are secure. How do you answer that? It sounds pretty reasonable. It sounds like all the drones are going over there. There's not been a drone over Memphis the last time I checked.
Well, you know, to answer your question about the foreign things, when we invaded Iraq, land armies, and there's a lot of researchers that have found this out now, the land occupations, that's an easy mark. And so when they say we have not had another 9/11, 6,300 troops have been killed, sitting ducks. And so be a smart terrorist here. Well, be a smart terrorist. Who would you go after? Would you go after the people that are closer? So they were already there, and they said this was almost Bush's gift to bin Laden initially when they, again, unjustly and stupidly invaded Iraq, which had no connection to 9/11 whatsoever. So that's one answer. There have been attacks of minor scope. Even internationally, we are now seeing 20 times. We used to see in the decade leading up to 9/11,
right,
somewhere between 160, and these are State Department figures, 160 deaths caused by international terrorism, and the high was the African embassies was 740. After 9/11, I wish I had a graph, that goes up like this. And we never hear about it because our media doesn't tell us about this, but you check those State Department stats right now, and in the last 5 years, the deaths range. Now think of what I just said, 100, 200, 300 were before. They range now between the low of 13,000 deaths per year to 23,000 deaths per year caused by international terrorism.
Well, so now it's parallel. So as the $2 trillion went up in surveillance, we see the thousands going up in the number of terrorist attacks.
So that's why it's worse. It's not a benign thing. This is actually causing international terrorism. And I have not yet researched domestic terrorism. The Norwegian killer who killed 70 young people in Norway, the man who shot Giffords, they would not even be classified by the State Department because they're considered domestic terrorists. And I have a feeling, I just have a suspicion that there's a lot of right-wing kind of overreaction to this volatile period we're in, that's also going up.
Well, I want to do this. I wanted to pull a clip from the opening segment from the Frontline Washington Post story about Top Secret America, because again, it's fabulous because it's visual. The visuals that you want with your graph, we're going to get a visual at this PBS.
You think you know America, but you don't know Top Secret America. We're all aware that there are 3 branches of government in the United States, but in response to 9/11, a 4th branch has emerged. It is protected from public scrutiny by extraordinary secrecy. Top Secret America.
This is a closed community, and since 9/11, it's become even more so.
The money spigot was just opened after 9/11, and nobody dared say, I don't think we should be spending that much.
It has become so big, and the lines of responsibility are so blurred that even our nation's leaders don't have a handle on it. Where is it? It's being built from coast to coast, hidden within some of America's most familiar cities and neighborhoods. In Colorado, in Nebraska, in Texas, in Florida, in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Top Secret America includes hundreds of federal departments and agencies operating out of 1,300 facilities around this country. They contract the services of nearly 2,000 companies. In all, more people than live in our nation's capital have top secret security clearance.
It's, again, the size, the lack of transparency, and the cost. And if we don't get it right, the consequences are gigantic.
Almost takes your breath away. We have Ed Helms has returned to our conversation, and of course we are talking with Ray McGovern and Coleen Rowley. I was looking at some numbers, and I want to sort of take that visual and put it in perspective. And some guy noted that we have 5% of the world's population. Back in 2001, we were actually producing 23% of the entire world's economic output. Today, that's 19%. So that has shrunk. But what has grown is the investment we have made in surveillance and security. We now represent 2/3 of what the entire world spends on surveillance. One country of 5% now pays 2/3 of that bill. Mm-hmm. That is just unbelievable. And what I'm trying to figure out is it because it is so secretive that it is able to grow exponentially? Isn't it by definition supposed to be secret because it's surveillance? And therefore, how do you get transparency? How do you accomplish accountability? It almost seems like it's the opposite of what they're charged to do. They're charged to go undercover, to be secret, to leave no fingerprints, to find out this information. And yet, we see the numbers exploding, and we're raising questions. So how do you bring transparency and accountability to something that by definition is supposed to happen behind closed doors or behind the curtain?
Well, please jot that down for your upcoming questioning of presidential candidates, because that is the real, million-dollar question. There are 77 million decisions every year to overclassify intelligence. The experts say, this is not Coleen Rowley, these are the intelligence experts actually say that it's between 50 to 90% overclassification. It's a very simple fix, by the way. A lot of these things are not hard fixes at all. Hopefully the presidential candidates will know some. But I mean, essentially you just have to sample every classification, not every, just sample the decisions to classify and review them. An IG could do this. You can temporarily limit secrecy. Most of your investigations, I worked on mob cases in New York, and they did have to be secret for a year or two because you cannot tell the mobsters that you're listening in to their sit-downs.
Right, and people understand that.
But so when it goes to court, they give the defense attorneys those things because it's a very temporary thing. In Top Secret America, there are no time limits put on it. That is incredible.
Yeah. So
the other thing is there's lots of money to be
we got to talk about the money.
You got to go back to the money.
Yeah, you got to.
Who's going to control us? Congress people? Congress people, they're bought and sold. I mean, they really are bought and sold. Look at who is contributing to their campaigns. It's all these profiteers on these wars. And so there's a kind of a noxious incentive to keep things secret so people can get more and more money. I mentioned Michael Chertoff before. There are scads of Michael Chertoffs around making big bucks. Why? I'd be satisfied with $1 million myself, but we're talking trillions, and we talked before about what trillions really involve.
And we know what Cheney brought to the Defense Department, the whole idea of outsourcing. I mean, Halliburton, way in the early '90s, did that study to say, can we save money if we outsource certain segments of the Defense Department? Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, you could save a lot of money. And then the first person that got a no bid contract was Halliburton to do all those savings. But now with the surveillance, we're also finding out that too has been outsourced or contracted out. That's really what Dana Priest's book is all about. So now you've got private institutions operating under secrecy, getting these huge contracts with no accountability and no transparency. And you're pointing out that the three things that the three attacks were not found with all those new widgets and gadgets and surveillance and dots, but by a T-shirt guy on a street in New York City. And you have to start asking, at what point does someone say, and maybe I want to go to you, I mean, what would our founding fathers have said if they saw this kind of almost rape of the taxpayer in the name of security and surveillance?
Right. Well, and we've been trying to remind New Hampshire voters of what President Washington, President Jefferson, President Madison had to say. President Madison talking about a duty of peace. And so we would ask, Coleen, how can New Hampshireites, when they're having coffee with a presidential candidate, how can they communicate that this is out of control, that somehow we need a president that can say no, that can give whistleblowers more power and authority, people like you that have tried to fight the good fight against all kinds of bureaucratic headwinds. Where are the levers on this to say no?
Of course. We are seeing fraud, outright fraud, even hoaxes. Our CIA was duped to the tune of $20 million by a guy who said he had secret software who could decode Al Jazeera broadcasts. He practically brought planes down. That's how bad this is. To reveal fraud, it's in public corruption, it's kind of insidious. And so you need whistleblowers, you need truth tellers, and you need people like Dana Priest, that Fourth Estate investigative reporters, to be empowered to reveal the truth. That's key. Now, I wonder if we'll see any presidential candidate actually give that answer, because all of the politicians now unfortunately are going very much in the opposite direction. They are so afraid of what they term as leaks and treason that they're using the old Espionage Act that's supposed to be used on like Aldrich Ames, the CIA, and Robert Hansen and the FBI, people who sold secrets to the enemy. They're actually trying to broaden that to stop whistleblowing in the government. Even when you've witnessed true fraud, waste, abuse, some of these companies, we remember back to the Pentagon where they were charging $500 for a toilet seat and things, but that's minor compared to now. So when you got a lot of money, you get a lot of corruption and you get a lot of fraud. One of the things we should be doing is actually giving whistleblower protection in government. It doesn't even exist in top secret America. There's no whistleblower protection at all.
There is a silver lining to this. We mentioned about the press. What I call the fawning corporate media cannot be depended upon to tell the people the truth. Witness the fact that James Risen, when he realized that we were being wiretapped or we were being eavesdropped upon against the law, the New York Times kept that story out of the media for several months before George Bush got reelected. Okay, so that's a real problem. So what needs to happen? We need to make sure that we know who are funding these candidates. That should be easy enough to find out. When they come to speak here,
who are funding these candidates? Isn't this interesting? We're talking about the growth of the surveillance community. We're talking about the huge number of now private contractors. An interesting statistic. It turns out that about 29% of the surveillance community is now private contractors. Okay, they're companies. It turns out that 50% of their entire budget, however, goes to pay the 29%. So it turns out to be incredibly lucrative to be in that 29% because you're making more money than the people that are actually in the with titles with a government title next to their name. And what's worse is not only do you see these corporations doing so well, but they're so smart. Because then they go into the FBI, they go into the CIA, they attract the best and brightest minds, and they put them on their private payroll. So we're hollowing out government, we're making these guys more sophisticated and more rich. We have it so that it's not transparent, and you just said, follow the money. You now have a decision called Citizens United that basically says you can write these checks, no one can know, no one can track it, they can spend unlimited amounts of money on campaigns. And the irony is, just when we need to follow the money, because of the lack of transparency, look what we have. It's kind of like we're now boxed into a situation where there's so little wiggle room to figure out where the truth begins and where the lies end.
I'm going to clear you all for a top secret piece of information.
Oh, good, I'm ready.
The Fourth Estate is dead. The press is dead. There's a Fifth Estate. Okay? Yeah. The Fifth Estate is in the ether. It's called the web. It's called the internet, okay? Whistleblowers now, with some assurance of protection, can get their stuff out and into the ether and down into our computers and sometimes into our media. Now, if you take WikiLeaks, you take Bradley Manning, who's about to be tried, did you know that one of the people in FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, said, Coleen, you wrote a op-ed with Bogdan Zakovich.
Exactly, and not only government employees who actually witness, I said fraud, waste, abuse, it's also risk to public safety. So if there had been a WikiLeaks before 9/11, I really have no doubt that even the agents, the FBI agents in Minnesota, because they're worried people could die. And if you are worried about, oh, I'm going to be violating this piece of paper I signed that I promised secrecy, or it's a constitutional violation, or there's such a serious risk that I know of that people will die, many good government employees would actually avail themselves of WikiLeaks. Now this is, of course, let me throw up my cartoon right here. Ted Rowley drew a cartoon that shows the spine, actually even in a bedroom, and of course, the silly notion that this is somehow going to protect us with all of this vacuuming of information and whatever. But you know, if you think about the need for an investigative journalist, it's not just whistleblowers. It's two things. We need a way to get it out. And this kind of spying that is going on is impacting, it's the reason why you say the media is dead. It's not necessarily their faults. They are also under this, every one of these communications they have. How could we have Deep Throat again? How could we actually have a Woodward and Bernstein who know of presidential illegalities and brought a president down because they met Deep Throat in a garage? Ask the presidential candidates. Do you support what would you do if Deep Throat, I mean, do they support this? And most of them will have to really think hard because their effort amongst the profiteers right now is not only to shut down WikiLeaks, to try to prosecute life and even possibly execution of people that essentially fulfilled the New York Times role back in the Pentagon Papers time. Not only to do that, but to actually threaten everybody out there, including journalists, including reporters.
Okay, so Coleen, you'd have people in New Hampshire ask presidential candidates, remember Watergate, and the people that revealed criminal behavior, and the real criminal behavior was not burglaries, but it was stealing an election. It was trying to control the decision of election, taking away from the American people our democracy. Do you support making sure that the people that were releasing information, the whistleblowers, if you will, the deep throats, are protected? Is that the question for presidential candidates here?
Weren't they patriots?
Weren't
they patriots? I mean, those were not whistleblowers. They were patriots. And that's because it was ultimately about the security of our democracy, the security of our election system. And that's, I mean, another question that I can't imagine people not asking is because we are so afraid to look at the defense budget, which is really frightening. I think people need to know that in 1999 they required an audit of all the agencies in government. And just this couple of weeks ago, they announced the audits for 2011. 23 agencies passed their audit. One did not. What is it? The Department of Defense.
And they have never passed.
Never passed.
And so they hope to do it earlier in 2014.
So what do you say to people?
Need to know, okay, is there's enough money. You don't have to fire your teachers. You don't have to fire your police or your firefighters. There's enough money. Half of the money you pay in income taxes goes to the Pentagon to fight these feckless wars, to buy this expensive surveillance equipment, the drones and everything else. Half, okay? That's as much as the rest of the world combined spends on defense. So there's enough money. It's just being wasted in these other enterprises. And so people need to know that because that's the most important thing. And that's what's driving the occupation movement. People are beginning to realize, wow, I don't have to lose my job.
Right.
There are plenty of jobs.
And it's more important than that, too, because not only is it a waste, But Coleen, you mentioned that a lot of this stuff is now being turned on to the domestic market. So it's not about Afghanistan, it's not about Pakistan, it's not about China. It is now about California and Memphis and Indiana and all those places.
And my wife is a retired teacher, and at a national conference and a presenter after she retired, I heard this presenter say, he paused and said, you know how we decide how many prison beds we're going to need in different areas in the next 10 years? We look at the third grade reading scores in that area. We know what the problem is. And the money's going for all this frou-frou and the rest of it. And meanwhile, this country is going bankrupt and will be bankrupt unless the citizens of New Hampshire and across this country stand up with the kind of courage that we've seen our two panelists show. Ray McGovern and Rowley also have websites and other information where people can get their truth to power voice heard and information. And Ray McGovern is going to stay, and I think Coleen, to help some of these presidential candidates give a presidential briefing. This is a man that was the designated hitter for one of the most powerful institutions in the world, the Central Intelligence Agency. They designated this man to whisper in the ear of presidents. 2, 3, 4, how many did you brief? Three actual elected United States presidents. And so we've made an offer. I understand Governor Romer has accepted this offer and other candidates, and we'll report, and I think we'll be live streaming these briefings that will be coming up. So this is going to be happening in the next few days.
Coleen, I want to remind people again, because you were there at 9/11, that the problem wasn't that there wasn't enough information. The problem wasn't that they hadn't scooped up enough, but the problem was they didn't connect the dots, they compartmentalized, and it was secrecy. That was the problem. And look at what's happened a decade later. Not only have we've made every single thing worse. We now have more dots, we now have more secrecy, and we have less transparency. It is unbelievable when you analyze the mistakes and look at what we've done to compound those mistakes and to sacrifice an economy. To sacrifice an economy on mismanagement.
Let's remember what Osama bin Laden did say. He never said he hated U.S. democracy. He said, I'm going to bankrupt the United States. He had some optimism because he had accomplished this with Afghanistan. And now, of course, you see this problem with our burgeoning debt.
Right. Well, I want to leave with this wonderful quote by John Pike. He's the director of global security, and he's talking about this increased money being spent on surveillance. And he said, so what do you think? How are we doing? He said, well, sometimes we are getting our money's worth. But sometimes I think it would be better to truck the money we spend to a large parking lot and set fire to it. I mean, this is a guy who does global security for a living. This is a guy who asks the questions. And when he looks, he realizes that so much of it is waste at a time we can't afford.
Yeah, and the thing really is the opportunity cost. Now, that's the fancy word that the economists use, but it means for every weapon that we build, and Eisenhower said this himself, for every weapon that we build, we could be hiring 5 more teachers. These are the things that are...
Didn't he use the word theft?
Theft.
Yes.
These are the things that are being stolen from our children, from our workers, and I think the Occupy movement is going to spread the word around, and we are in for a real turning point here. I think we need to pay attention and watch and help the occupation movement throughout this country.
And I need to say thank you to Coleen Rowley, former FBI agent, and for Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst, and of course, it's a pleasure to have you, and you have lots of information now to ask your presidential candidates. Thank you.